McCulloch v. Maryland, 1819. The Supreme Court of the United States. Court. This case was decided by the Supreme Court of the United States in 1819. Issues. There are two questions in this case. 1. Does Congress have the constitutional power to create a bank? 2. If so, then may individual states tax such a bank? Facts. These are the facts of the case. In 1816, Congress passed an act that created the Bank of the United States. And in 1817, that same bank opened a branch in the state of Maryland. However, in 1818, Maryland's state legislature passed its own act that imposed an annual tax on every out-of-state bank that operated in Maryland. And at the time, the only bank fitting that description was the Bank of the United States. McCulloch was the head of the Maryland branch of the Bank of the United States, and he refused to pay the tax. In response, the state of Maryland sued McCulloch along with the bank. The case was appealed to the Maryland Court of Appeals. The court upheld the defendant's contention that, since the Constitution is silent on the subject of banks, Congress had no explicit constitutional power to create a bank, like the Bank of the United States in the first place, and so any such creation was unconstitutional. The case was then appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. The court disagreed with the Maryland Court of Appeals and reversed its decision. The Supreme Court first determined that Congress does indeed have the constitutional power to create a bank. It reasoned that this power is derived from the Constitution's grant to Congress of the enumerated, general power to tax and spend for the general welfare. And in addition to this explicitly enumerated power, the Constitution's Necessary and Proper Clause gave Congress the power to pass laws it deemed necessary and proper to carry out that power. Since Congress had decided that creating a bank was necessary and proper for raising money to carry out its enumerated power to tax and spend, it accordingly had the implied constitutional power to do just that. Secondly, the Supreme Court held that since the plaintiff bank was created by a federal statute, Maryland could not tax it. That is because federal laws trump state laws. So, federally created entities, for example banks, can't be inhibited by state law. And since the plaintiff bank's function was to serve the nation as a whole, it should not be stifled by an individual state through a tax. Rules to remember. 1. The Constitution specifically grants Congress the power to tax and spend for the general welfare, and the implied power to make other laws necessary and proper to carry out that enumerated power. 2. Federal laws are supreme, and states may not make laws that interfere with the federal government's exercise of its constitutional powers.